Okay, so as I said, we're going to be discussing the Jewish world of Yeshua's day. You'll recall that I mentioned to you that a good resource for this class would be The Challenge of Jesus by N.T. Wright, if you wanted to go and get a hold of that book. It's in the bibliography, yes. And if you, you can get it on Amazon or one of the other book clubs. The material, a lot of material that we'll be discussing today comes from chapters 2 and 3 of that book. So if you want to go back over it,
we can buy that if we want.
But let's begin. And I want to begin by talking about the Jewish view of the Jewish expectation at the time of Messiah Yeshua. The prophecy in Daniel chapter 9, in which Daniel talks about these 70 weeks of years, was a well-known prophecy and had been discussed and written about all during what we call the intertestamental period. So there was already tremendous expectation, messianic expectation in the time of Yeshua. And depending on who you were and what grouping of Jewish people you fell under, what stream of Judaism you fell under, you might have one or another views on Messiah, about God's law, about the future of the Jewish people. Okay, but there were certain things which were, for the most part, common. Now, let me just ask that somebody over there needs to mute themselves. Sonia, if you could mute yourself, honey, I'd appreciate it because there's a lot of banging around. Doesn't seem to be able to hear me. Sonia? Okay, so we're going to take a look at those promises, though. There were certain things which were common and which to my mind, are quite biblical in their expectations. And in order to understand that, I want to take a look at a portion from Acts chapter 2. This has to do with the first sermon, quote unquote, given by the Apostle Paul.
Peter.
I'm sorry, the Apostle Peter, thank you. Found in the second chapter of Acts. So if we'll go there, we take a look at that.
Your Bible.
This is particularly apropos for the period of time in which we find ourselves, because the events of this particular portion of Scripture occurred on Shavuot. So here we are approaching Shavuot, and what would be a perfect, better time to study this portion than right now, right?
Mm-hmm.
So in your Bible, it may have a subheading, something like the Day of Pentecost or something like that, or the outpouring of the Holy Spirit or some other such appellation, right? What we're interested in is that it was Shavuot, one of the pilgrim feasts of Israel, and traditionally, the Shavuot celebrated the giving of Torah on Sinai. It happened 50 days after we left Egypt on that first Passover, and on the 50th day we received the Torah on Sinai. That's the understanding of the Jewish people, and It was, in other words, that it was a day of revelation. God revealing himself and fulfilling promises to the Jewish people. Because what he told them was he was going to take them out of Egypt and bring them to himself and make them his people, which is precisely what he did at Sinai. Right? He made them into a kingdom of priests and holy nation. So it's about God fulfilling his promises to the people and revealing himself uniquely to them. So let's take a look at what exactly happened on this particular day, on this first Shavuot after the passing and rising of Messiah. All right? So we're told that people from all over diaspora, all these Jews from every country in the diaspora were there at Jerusalem, which is true. It's a pilgrim feast, so people come from all over for those periods of time to worship in Jerusalem. Nothing unusual about that. But here, the account tells us very specifically that the people, it says in verse 5, for instance, now there were Jews living in Jerusalem, devout men from every nation under heaven. And that's an indication there of precisely what God is intending to do, that he is going to include all the nations. Interestingly enough, they were represented by the Jewish people, at least at this point. So here Israel is the representative nation, representing, in this case, all the nations, all these nations of the world, every nation under heaven. Do you understand that? You see that? It's a balance being struck there. That Israel has as a responsibility, as a representative nation before God, before the sake of all people. Not only for the sake of Israel, but for the sake of all people. Okay? And it says, then we're told that a wind comes whipping through and the flames land on all the... And I can tell you that's exactly what happened. The Jewish people have legends about this, that if you read them, when the words of God came out, it sounded like thunder in the ears of the Israelites, and the rabbis say that what happened really was God spoke the Torah in all 70 languages of the world, all at once, in every human language, and so it sounded like thunder in the ears of the Israelites. And then it came out from the mountain as fire and landed on each one of the Israelites as God spoke to them. Right? So, obviously the scenes are remarkably the same, right? Same thing. Okay. So, we're told about all these people from all over the world. And then Peter stands up in front of all of them. Now, I want you to imagine this. We're told, we have this picture of this scene as if it happened in some dark little room, some upper room somewhere. And that's not even possible. There are people from all over. They're not disciples of Yeshua until, at least some of them, until after they hear the good news. This is happening at the temple. This is happening on the steps of the temple where people would gather during these festivals, to enjoy. Because remember something, in Herod's day, the temple was a huge mall complex of the temple and courtyards and all kinds of stuff. And you remember Yeshua had to turn over the money changers and obviously money being exchanged and all kinds. It's by the way, if you've ever been there, it's a 35-acre plot of land plus the steps. I mean, it's huge. 35 acres big. House many people. So they're standing on the steps, and who knows how many people are there. We're told by the end of this episode that 3,000 people came to faith. So there must have been a crowd.
Yeah.
A crowd there. So if anybody tells you, oh yeah, this happened in the upper room, don't believe them. That's not even possible. This happened on probably on the southern steps, because that was the way people entered the temple during those pilgrim festivals. You can go to the southern steps to this day, today, and they've been restored and they're beautiful, and you can go up in there and do the whole thing. All right, so anyway, Peter and his sermon. He begins by telling them a number of things. Makes 4 promises that God intends to keep in Messiah Yeshua. He begins by quoting the prophet Joel. And if you know anything about the prophet Joel, that stuff comes from the second chapter of Joel, if I'm not mistaken. Yes. What that chapter alludes to is the restoration of Israel in the end time. Israel would be restored to her proper place among the nations. Remember something, at this time, Israel is under occupation by the Roman Empire. It's not their own land. They don't rule themselves. And now God is promising that Israel will be restored. So this is that prophecy of restoration, right? It's not about the tongues and wild signs and all that. That's secondary.
Yeah.
The primary thing is God's restoration of Israel as the chief among the nations. All right? It shall be that everyone who calls on the name of the Lord will be saved. You know? So that's the first thing. Secondly, it's in verse 22 and following, Peter says, "Men of Israel, listen to these words of Yeshua the Nazarene, a man attested to you by God with miracles and wonders and signs which God performed through him in your midst. Just as you yourselves know, this man was delivered over by the predetermined plan and foreknowledge of God. You nailed to a cross by the hands of godless men and put him to death." I love that verse because that verse tells you exactly who you need to blame for the death of Messiah Yeshua. Everybody, including God, because it was God's plan. God planned it, you allowed it, and he was handed over to the Gentiles and they killed him.
Surely he said,
so that's everybody.
Myself.
Everybody's included, okay? Not any one person. But the point there isn't about who caused his death. The real point is verse 24. But God raised him up again, putting an end to the agony of death, since it was impossible for him to be held in its power. So the second promise, the first promise is the restoration of Israel in its fullness, that they will return to their land. They will be, they will be chief among. They will take their place among the nations in the appropriate place. The second promise is the resurrection from the dead. This is the great promise. Not when I die, I'm going to go to heaven. The resurrection of the dead. Okay? And there he quotes Psalm 16 in proof of that, right? It said, "Because you will not abandon my soul to Hades or allow your Holy One to undergo decay." Psalm 16 is a psalm of resurrection, a song of the Messiah and how he will not be left in the ground. So that's the second promise. So the first promise is restoration. The second promise is resurrection. All right? Then it goes on to say in verse 29 and following. Let's see. Let's move on. Let's actually jump ahead so we don't spend too much time here. Let's move to verse 34. 33, I'm sorry. It says, "Therefore, having been exalted to the right hand of God, and having received from the Father the promise of the Holy Spirit, which he has poured forth, which you both see and hear, for it was not David who ascended into heaven, but he himself says, the Lord said to my Lord, sit at my right hand until I make your enemies a footstool for your feet. Therefore, let all the house of Israel know for certain that God has made him both Lord and Messiah, this Yeshua whom you crucified." So here we're being made a promise about the King of the kingdom, that Messiah Yeshua is Lord, that he has taken up the lordship, the throne of David himself. And this was an ancient promise that God had made first to David and to all of Israel, that he would never, there would always be a descendant of David sitting on the throne. So here is this third promise, Fulfilled in Messiah, by the way. You understand, all of these things are being fulfilled by Messiah Yeshua. These four, one more promise that we're going to talk about. So first, the restoration of Israel. Second, the resurrection from the dead. Third, the kingdom and its kings. Messiah Yeshua. And then finally, one more. It says in verse 37. Now, when they heard this, they were, who's they?
All those
Jewish people who were listening, right? They heard this, they were pierced to the heart, and they said to Peter and the rest of the apostles, brethren, what should we do? What do we do about this? And Peter said to them, repent, and each of you be baptized in the name of Messiah Yeshua for the forgiveness of your sins. Everybody wants to stop right there. But the important one is the next clause. And you will receive the gift of the Holy Spirit. For the promise is for you and your children and for all who are far off, as many as the Lord our God will call to himself. What does that mean? The gift of the Holy Spirit. In other words, that now through Messiah Yeshua, the Holy Spirit will indwell us, will take up his residence in us, which is the promise of God, that God has made for his eternal presence in the midst of the people of Israel. We every day, 3 times a day, even on Shabbos, we say the Tekazena prayer, which at the end says, "Pray, blessed are you, O Lord our God, who restores his presence to Zion." We keep praying that prayer that God will restore his presence in the midst of his people. Well, here's Peter telling us that in Messiah Yeshua, that's exactly what happens. And that's what he's telling these people to do. Put their faith in the Messiah. Be baptized and you receive the Spirit, God's gift to you and to your children. See? So these four promises are essential to our understanding of the mission of Messiah Yeshua. Unless we understand that in him these things are fulfilled, it's really difficult for us to understand entirely what Messiah Yeshua was doing all the time. Okay, what exactly happened? And this will be particularly important when we get to the time when we start talking about the meaning of his death. The meaning of his death and the meaning of his resurrection. Okay, what that did to the world. Remember, one of the questions we said we have to answer is, why did he have to die? Right? So keep these promises in mind when we get there. And it'll all start coalescing for you, I think, coming together. So all right, so we already discussed that Messiah Yeshua came into the world at a particular time and place, and that in order to understand the Gospels properly, we need to know more about that world, the world in which he lived. So the time of the first century of the Common Era in Judea was a time of tremendous volatility. And you can understand why. It was an occupied country. You know, we never lived in an occupied, unless you were part here during the Revolution. You were never part of any, kind of a situation where, unless you came from some foreign country where this did happen, living under occupation. And living under occupation, you're not free, and it causes a lot of stress. We see that in the world today. The countries that are occupied, even in Israel, let's call spade a spade. People feel that they're being occupied by another power. They act funny, they don't take it well. Okay, and as a result of that, there was a lot of difficulty. For instance, the Jewish people lived in the land at the time, for the most part, although there probably were, even in that day, more Jewish people in diaspora than there were in the land. But there were probably a lot more Jewish people in the world than there even are now. There are about 13, 14 million Jews in the world. There might have been a similar or greater number of Jewish people in the world at that time. Many of them living in the diaspora, because after the Babylonian captivity, more Jewish people lived outside of the land than lived in the land. Not that many returned. Does anybody know how many Jewish people came back with Ezra and Nehemiah?
About 50,000.
50,000. Not many.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, more and more, emigrated thereafter. I mean, in bits and pieces. But never, it's never like, all the Jews came back to the land. That's not going to happen until the millennium. We talked about that in the Revelation study. Okay? So, even though there are many Jewish people living in the land, they were occupied and did not. So many Jews still felt that they were in the diaspora, that they were still, that the galut was still upon them, even though they lived in the land. And I will tell you, I believe that Israel is in galut, even though they live in the land today. Until the Messiah returns, we live in galut. It's just that way. Even though there are those who live in the land, and if you've ever been over there, or you have friends who live in the land, they're always hawking you to come over there and live there. But we're still in galut. It wouldn't matter if I lived in Jerusalem; I would still be in the I would still be in the galut until the Messiah returns. That's my feeling about it. Now others feel differently, So I'm just like, that's my opinion. But these certainly people in that age felt that way about it. Okay, so there were lots of ideas formulating and fomenting around and different ways of approaching God as a Jew. And so we're going to talk about some of these Jewish groups to get to know them a little bit better today. And this way, when we go into the gospel stories and we see Yeshua interacting with each one of these people, we have a better understanding of them. And then maybe a better understanding of what exactly it is Messiah Yeshua is saying to them and what he is not saying to them. Okay? All right. So let's start with the famous ones, the Pharisees. Okay? So these guys, the Pharisees, or what we call a separatist party, really, the Pushim is the Hebrew word, Pushim. I didn't give you that in your notes.
Yes, it is.
Oh, I did. Did I get it?
Pushim.
Oh, I did give it. Oh, I did. Okay. So it's a better at this than I thought I was. Okay. So the Pushim started off as what we call a Hasidic group. Now let me in order to not Hasidic like you think about it. Hasid means pious. So they were a pietistic group. Now, if you know anything about the history of the Jewish people after the diaspora and after the Maccabean period, you had this group called the Hasmoneans, which was the dynasty that arose out of Judah Maccabee and his descendants. They became the kings. Now, the problem with that is they were from the priestly family, and they had no business being kings, according to Jewish law. Nevertheless, they were, and there was a dynasty that was filled with intrigue and all kinds of, everybody's killing everybody else in order to gain power. It was pretty ugly. But what did happen as a result of the diaspora was that a number of groups, this one, the one we're talking about now, let's start with them. And they were a Hasidic group or a pietistic group that said, we will never go into diaspora again because we are disobedient to Torah. And so they were very meticulous about their observation of Torah. They tried very hard, and they evolved into the Pushim. Okay, they became this group. In fact, this group had a lot of trouble with the kings because the kings were always, which is kind of ironic because the Maccabees were these people who wanted to preserve Jewish halakha, and now they're killing the guys who are doing it because they want to act like animals, whatever. You got to read some of the intermediary history of the Maccabean period to get a clearer picture of exactly what was going on there. But it's not a nice period in historical term. the Jewish people were independent for a period of time during that era. Interestingly enough, they broke away from the Greeks and they had a period of independence until Rome came in. It's all a very sordid history. You can read all about it in history books, but we don't have time to go over that entire story. Let's cover what we can here. So this, like I said, this party emerged largely out of a group of scribes and sages who hark back to Ezra and the Great Assembly. The meaning of the name is unclear, but it's Spushim. It refers to the rejection of Hellenic culture and so on. One of the factors that distinguished the Pharisees from other groups prior to the destruction of the temple was the belief that all Jews had to observe the purity laws which apply to the temple service. Now, I want to talk about that just for a minute, because this is very relevant when we get into disputes between Yeshua and the Pharisees. So the Pharisees extended the notion of ritual purity beyond the temple. The Bible, biblical Torah, is really talking about purity laws as they relate to your participation in temple ritual. So if you were going to make a sacrifice, you had to be ritually pure. If you were going to go there for prayer, you had to be ritually pure. You couldn't go into the temple environment without ritual purity. But it did not extend beyond that. If you were in your home, the same rules did not apply. Okay? Even if you did become ritually impure, all it meant was you stayed away from the temple until you were ritually pure. Mm-hmm. However, what the Pharisees did, and they did this, I think it probably started while they were in diaspora. This thinking started then, and I can't prove all of this, but it started then and then extended back to when they finally came back into the land. That your home became a temple. That every meal was a holy meal. This is why I have to do netilat yadayim, washing your hands. It's a you don't really cleaning your hands doing that. You're actually just doing a ritual purity thing. Okay, that all of these rules in effect extended into your home. I mean, even nidah. Let me. You're all adults here. Nidah, in which talks about sexual purity in the home. That's about, again, if one were to violate those rules of nidah, in other words, let's say a woman is menstruating and has sex with somebody, what that does is make them ritually impure. But if you're not going to the temple, how does it matter that much? Now, people may want to do it as a sign of respect for God, and that's all well and good. But let's understand it precisely what it's about. It means you couldn't then participate in temple ritual until you were made ritually clean.
I understand what you're saying relative to this, but what I find interesting is the practices of cleanliness that we practice today probably came out of all that, didn't it?
Yes.
It may have come out of that,
So
but I think the West. I don't know how the West we didn't clean up very much until the 19th century.
Germ theory.
So it took a long time for people to realize that there was a relationship between being all dirty and nasty and getting sick.
Common sense.
I don't know that they were looking at the Bible for their rules about cleanliness. To be honest,
I thought maybe through the Christian church.
No,
actually, the Christian church opposite did a lot of things.
Actually,
If you look on a history of the Europe,
What was that, Tom?
there's actually a Jewish doctor, named Samuelowitz, but he, I think it was the Middle Ages, but I can't remember exactly when history, but women, like a high percentage, I think 20% were dying in childbirth, and you notice that the physicians were just washing their hands in the bowl. And so he restored the idea of running water from Leviticus.
From living water, okay.
And so that they were cleansing their hands properly from bacteria, and immediately the
birth rates went up.
The birth rate went up and the death rate went down.
Yeah. a scientist. He observed something and made a decision regarding it. But anyway, let's understand this thing about the Pushim in particular, this notion of the ritual purity, and we will see it arise in any number of cases. Particularly when Yeshua, they come to Yeshua and they say, "How come your disciples don't wash their hands before they eat?" And Yeshua goes into this whole teaching about purity, in which some people say he then cleansed all foods, which has absolutely nothing. It's a whole discussion about ritual purity. It has nothing to do with what you're eating. So, but we'll understand that better when we get there as a result of understanding what the Pushim's real argument was.
Right.
Okay? Okay. So they were big time on those purity laws. The major difference, however, was the continued adherence of the Pharisees to the laws and traditions of the Jewish people in the face of assimilation. They were very meticulous about this. A second thing that we should note about the Pharisees, the Pushim, was that they were sticklers for the oral tradition. That already an oral tradition had formed. It was not completely formulated, written down until the year 200 CE when we got the Mishnah. But prior to that, there was a whole body of oral tradition whereby one was supposed to understand Torah. In other words, it's really not possible to understand the Torah fully unless you have the oral tradition to explain a lot of it. That was their view. I can understand, and we'll see that Yeshua respected that tradition by and large, insofar as it did not contramand, what's the right word? Contradict the Torah, as Yeshua understood it. So it wasn't like he was anti-traditionalist or even anti-oral tradition, only insofar as it nullified the true commandments. There's a famous case, of course, that we may see later on, in which Messiah Yeshua says to them, you guys, you nullify the Torah through your traditions. And he gives them the example of Korban, in which a person says, okay, anything that might have helped my parents, my aging parents, I'm sorry, I can't give them because it is already Korban. It's dedicated to the temple. In other words, I'm giving it to the temple. It's almost like a living trust situation. I've already dedicated it, so I can't give it to my parents because I already gave it to the temple. I get to use it while I'm alive, but once I'm dead, the temple gets whatever I have left. And in that way, they don't help their parents, which is the greater commandment. Messiah Yeshua says, honoring your mother and your father is more important than sacrifice. So that he says, you see how your tradition nullifies the word of God. You can't do that, right? So keep this in mind, so we understand the logic of the Pharisees as best we can. So when we get to the argument, you know what Yeshua is trying to say to them, instead of, oh, you Pharisees, you're all a bunch of bad guys. Because that's not what he's saying. And how many people here think Pharisees have a bad reputation? Isn't that your first impression when you hear the word Pharisee? In fact, if you look up, I think in the Oxford Dictionary, if you look up under hypocrite, or you look up the word Pharisee, it says hypocrite. It actually says something like that, a hypocrite.
Well, there's a series of
because he called some of them hypocrites, and some of them weren't.
Yeah. There's a section somewhere in the Gospels where Yeshua is vituperative. He goes, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites, like 7 times, and has a parable.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Bring that up again when we get around that neighborhood. And I'll give you, I'm going to give you something to look at that'll make you laugh.
Okay, good.
Okay. All right. Just remember, just make a mental note. Because you'll smile. But you may smile today because I think I may have some stuff in here about that. About what each one of these groups thought about the other. Okay. All right. Central beliefs of the Pharisees were shared by all Jews of the time. 1, monotheism, right? What's in my notes on this? All right. Secondly, that the Jewish people functioned as a kingdom of priests. they formed continued a form of Judaism that extended beyond the temple, applying Jewish law to mundane activities in order to sanctify the everyday world. This was a more participatory or democratic form of Judaism, by the way, in which rituals were not monopolized by an inherited priesthood, but rather could be performed by all adult Jews, individually or collectively, whose leaders were not determined by birth, but by achievement, scholarly achievement. So remember something, in biblical Judaism, the Levites got to do a lot of stuff. In fact, in Yeshua's day, by and large, the practice of Judaism was centered around the temple and its rituals, the holidays, the sacrifices, that kind of thing. Well, the average person couldn't perform those things. Those were required if you were either a Levite or a Kohen, something like that. So you know what I'm saying. So now, but Pharisaism was more democratic in that it allowed for the participation of many folks. Everybody's home was a temple. Everybody was a priest, the priesthood of all believers, which later on the church, came to latch onto. Right, the notion of the priesthood of all believers. So I already talked about them being believing in the oral tradition that God had transmitted the Torah and the oral tradition to Moses at Sinai. This comes down to us, by the way, in the Mishnah. If you look at chapter 1 of Pirkei Avot, it tells us precisely the order of transmission. It says God, I think, and it's a special word. I wish I could remember the Hebrew at the moment, but it's a word that's never used again on the passing of the oral tradition. Moses got it uniquely from God by a revelation, and then he passed it on to Joshua, who passed it on to the elders of the tribes, who passed it on to the prophets, and so on, all the way down to the men of the Great Assembly, and then the pairs, and blah, 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 blah. Now, so what they do is they, what's the right word? They sanctify and canonize the transmission of the oral tradition so that the oral tradition stands alongside the written tradition as authoritative. So this is their attitude, that the oral tradition carries as much weight, more or less, because there are nuances, as the written tradition. Now, rabbis do make a distinction between that which is written, or de'oraita, what they call de'oraita, and derabanan, which the rabbis have determined. They do make distinction between that, but I don't care. They still expect you to obey the Rabbanan like you obey a de'oraita. So, not much of a distinction there, as far as I can see. And the Pharisees were very much into this. This is why they can argue and scream at Yeshua about healing on Shabbos, for instance, or some other things that Yeshua allows, like when the guys are in the field and they pick some corn and whatever, and there's a big dispute. Okay, so we can understand these disputes a little bit better by knowing what the Pharisees believed and why they believed it, and why Yeshua was willing to overturn it if he felt the need. Mm-hmm. And it was typically not him breaking Torah. He wasn't a Torah breaker or a Shabbat breaker. He was simply dealing with things as they understood it in their own way.
A question.
Okay.
The Mishnah, which we have, wasn't set down until the Common Era, right? 200
of the Common Era.
Right. All right. But the Pharisees had an oral tradition. Is it just a foregone conclusion that they were the same oral tradition?
Yeah, well, let's put it this way. There's a lot of scholarly debate regarding that.
Oh, yes,
okay. Because there was an oral tradition in Yeshua's time. They speak of it.
Sure.
They speak of it. In the New Testament, it's spoken of numerous times that there was an oral tradition which went on, which was there from the very beginning. And in fact, I will argue with you that there is no way that the children of Israel were able to obey the Torah word for word from the moment they got it.
Mm-hmm.
Because there's just too much that is not explained. And so somebody would have had to, some leaders would have had to sit down and say, what did God mean when he said, you shall do no laborious work on Shabbos? We'll have to figure that out. That kind of thing. How do you pick a judge since they don't tell you anything about it? Just as appoint judges. Well, what is a judge? How old does a judge have to be? What does he have to know? Does he have? Are there any qualifying things about a judge? I mean, things like that. So obviously, an oral tradition developed the day Moses came down from Sinai. Okay.
Okay. Well, if they said that the oral tradition was, a revelation to Moses, to Joshua, etc., then doesn't it follow that it's the same oral tradition today?
No.
No, it doesn't?
No. What happened was, this is the best I can give you in a short period of time. It's a little unsophisticated, I'm afraid. There was a body of oral tradition based on your stream. Even within the Pharisees party, there were different schools of thought. You had Beit Hillel, you had Beit Shammai. These guys were, had many, and some of these disputes are given to us in the Mishnah.
I see.
Where Beit Hillel said this, Beit Shammai said that, but here's the thing. This is the rule.
Huh.
And I can tell you right now, Shammai won once, Hillel won 300 times. Okay. So that tells you there's more or less a singular voice in the writing of what became halakha through the Mishnah. You see?
Yeah.
And that has to do with the fact of who Judah Hanasi and Rabbi Meir, the men who were the compilers, the redactors of the Mishnah, where they were coming from.
I see.
They had choices to make of all of these different views and opinions that were floating out there as part of the oral tradition. And I'm sure there was a lot of minhag, local tradition, depending on who the leaders were. They didn't have rabbis particularly in those days, but who the congregational leader or the community leader might have been. So ultimately, though, it gets compiled and that gets written down. It's no longer an oral tradition; it's a written tradition. It's part of the written tradition.
All right. Well, I don't want to spend too much time on this, but
got a couple other issues.
But the issues, if they possibly are different oral traditions, if the issues which the Pharisees brought up to Yeshua, are they reflected in the Mishnah we have today?
Some of them.
Some of them are.
Some of them would be, and some of them are not. For instance, I'll give you one clear example. Yeshua had lots of disputes about healing on Shabbat. If you were to look in the Mishnah now, you will see that healing is okay under certain circumstances.
Very good. That answers my
question. To
question.
save a life, you can break any Torah law. Okay, it won the day. Because that was Hillel's position, by the way.
Oh,
so Yeshua and Hillel had a similar position as far as healing on Shabbat.
Sorry to take up so much time.
So that's one example, but I'm sure we could find many others in which
interesting. That's interesting.
Yeah, like that. Okay. So again, both Nicodemus and Josephus of Arimathea were Pharisees. And you could look at, we've already spoken about some of these examples, eating with tax collectors and sinners. That's an issue of purity that you find in Mark chapter 2. I told you about the purity issue, how the Pharisees have extended it beyond the environs of the temple. It's everywhere. So when we look at these arguments in Yeshua, if we were to go back and look at Mark chapter 2 and see that particular incident, here's Yeshua eating with a bunch of people who are unclean. And that makes you unclean by contact with them. And since you're supposed to be a rabbi, Yeshua, why are you filthing yourself up with these people? And, Messiah Yeshua's answer is, that's not how it works, boys. And besides, when I touch somebody, they get clean. It's the other way around. In my presence, everybody gets cleaned up. So that healing on Shabbat we just talked about. This is another issue that they argued about, but ultimately became Torah, as people understand that it's okay to heal on Shabbat. And Matthew 23, this is an interesting one that I think we'll take a look at. Okay, so if you want to open up your scripture to Matthew chapter 23 and verse 3, we'll take a look at this one. Because this is a puzzle that people have been struggling with even to this day, particularly in the Messianic period.
Here it is, woes, scribes and Pharisees.
Yeah, right. Well, let's look at verse 3. We'll start at verse 2. It says there, this is the Messiah speaking. It says, the scribes and the Pharisees have seated themselves in the chair of Moses. Therefore, all that they tell you to do and observe, all they tell you, do and observe, but do not do according to their deeds. For they say things and do not do them. In other words, that's why he starts the tirade about hypocrites and, hypocrites. He's not talking about all Pharisees. He's talking about these guys.
Mm-hmm.
Okay?
More blunt in the
So let's understand what he's saying here. So the scribes and the Pharisees have seated themselves in the chair of Moses. So the chair of Moses was the seat of authority in the synagogue. In fact, if you go to ancient synagogues, I went to one, where was it, in Caesarea once, not Caesarea, Capernaum. And in Capernaum, they have a synagogue. This synagogue was probably 3rd century, 4th century by then. But it was always a synagogue. It just got rebuilt, again and again. And they had an actual stone seat, which was raised up, which was the seat of Moses in this particular shul.
Okay.
That was, they had benches along the perimeter and the seat of Moses. And you'll notice what it says about Yeshua, for instance, in Luke chapter 4. It says he was handed the scroll of Isaiah, and he repeated it, and then he sat down and talked to them. Right? He said, "You see, this has been fulfilled in your hearing." But likely he sat in the seat of Moses. He would have just sat in that seat because that's the seat where you taught. The teacher would sit down and teach the community. You have a picture, okay. Okay, good. You have a picture of the Bible? Of the seat of Moses.
Ah.
Yep.
Bring a pillow.
Yeah, okay. So somebody was showing a picture of the seat of Moses. I could have probably gotten one, but I didn't fair enough for this class. But anyway.
I take it to the stone if he needs a pillow.
If you're going to be there for any length of time, that's why you keep those teachings short. Sitting on a stone chair is mostly fun. Okay. So anyway, like that. So here, Yeshua is talking about a group of Pharisees who are, of the hypocritical type. But you notice where he says the authority lies. He says, whatever they tell you to do it. In other words, that they have the right to declaim on halakha, on how to obey the law. He's giving them that right. A very interesting text, because the question is, how far does that go? And how does that affect our understanding of apostolic authority? Because after all, the Messiah Yeshua told them, all the authority I have has been given to you. So now you go ahead and you go out into the world and proclaim and make disciples of people and so on and so forth. It's a really interesting debate about what Yeshua is doing here. But it does tell us something about his view of the Pharisaical position, but it wasn't entirely negative, even though he does blast them right there. Because he's telling you to do whatever they tell you to do. Just don't be hypocrites like them. That's all. He says things like, what did he say? They tie up heavy burdens and lay them on men's shoulders, but they themselves are unwilling to move them with so much as a finger. Stuff like that. In other words, make a bunch of rules for everybody and then not obey them themselves. So, anyway. Okay, so that's a short little snippet of a picture of the Pharisees. So let's move on to Sadducees, which is the next biggest group.
Well, wouldn't you say you were going to make us laugh with the scribes and Pharisees thing?
Oh, well, I'm not prepared.
Oh,
I
okay.
thought I was going to have a couple of weeks to do this.
Oh, okay.
Now, actually, if we look at the top, there's a portion of the Talmud in which the Talmud has one group of Pharisees cursing. And,
Really?
yeah, it's the same sort of thing. It's the same kind of thing, calling them a bunch of hypocrites and snakes and all kinds of things.
In the Talmud.
Interesting. Yeah. Jewish people do that. You know, two Jews, three opinions are going to yell and scream at each other. You're a bad Jew, I'm the good one. Like that. Okay, let's talk about the Sadducees. So the Sadducees in Hebrew, Sadukim, or which comes from the word tzaddik, righteous people. These were a sect of Jews that were active in ancient Israel during the Second Temple period, and starting from around the 2nd century BC. During the time, they developed also during the same time as the Pharisees. The thing about the Sadducees was they were upper class people for the most part, who were most of whom were in the priestly class. So they were related to the Hasmoneans. Everything goes back to these Hasmoneans during the intertestamental period, this period between 200 BC and the time of Yeshua. I think the Maccabee thing happened about 150 BCE, something like that. And the Hasmoneans came in after that. And so the Sadducees were a part of this group. They were aligned with that party. They were mostly involved with temple administration. Very good job. Because so much money poured into the temple, these guys benefited from that. And so you had to be they were part of the upper class. If you know anything about the city of Jerusalem during that period of time, there was a lower city, David City, and an upper city. And the rich people, and of course the temple is all the way on the top of Mount Zion. And so the city was built in layers around that. And the upper city was where all the priestly class lived. And they lived very well, thank you. I saw one guy's house, 6,000 square feet. The guy lived in utter luxury his house had more amenities than mine.
What kind of car did you drive?
He didn't need to drive a car. I'll tell you what they did do. They had tunnels that allowed them to walk from their homes right into the Temple Mount because they didn't want to touch anything to make them impure. Because they did follow the laws of Levitical purity. So they would have mikvaot in their homes. They would do the whole ritual cleansing thing. And then they would have these special tunnels which led from their homes right into the temple so that they wouldn't encounter anybody who might make them unclean. It's really elaborate. I mean, it was amazing. Okay? So these people were more involved with the temple and they only followed Torah. They did not believe in the oral tradition. They followed the Torah and its rules, mostly the book of Leviticus, basically, as it related to temple rituals. Although there are stories in some of the Jewish writings of the time in which the Pharisees complained that these guys were so ignorant about appropriate temple ritual and halakha that they were constantly having to teach them what they were supposed to be doing so that they didn't ruin everything and destroy, like Yom Kippur. I think I remember reading a story about they had to tutor the high priest because he didn't know what he was doing. Because remember something, the high priest at the time of the Roman occupation was basically bought and sold by the Romans.
Political.
It was a political appointment. And it was done by virtue, you had to have Roman permission to do it. So it was one of those stupid things. Kind of like what happened to the papacy in the Middle Ages. You could purchase the papacy when rich families did. So, all right. So here it says that the sect was identified by Josephus with the upper social and economic echelon of Judean society. As a whole, the sect fulfilled various political, social, and religious roles, including maintaining the temple. The Sadducees are often compared to other contemporaneous sects, including the Pharisees and their sect is believed to have become extinct sometime after the destruction of the temple because there was just no temple anymore. There was no need for them. They sort of disappeared. It's an interesting phenomenon that basically all the other subgroups of Judaism beyond the Pharisees and the Messianics, who evolved into something else, disappeared for one reason or another. The Sadducees, because there was no longer a temple for them to be supported by, and for them to, ply their wares in, okay? And of course, their political position with the Romans was destroyed. So the doctrine of the Sadducees is this, that souls die with the bodies, nor do they regard the observation of anything besides what the law enjoins on them. I think it's, for instance, it's a virtue to dispute with those teachers of philosophy when they but this doctrine is received by a few. Yet those who still, let me just distill that for you. Basically, they completely disagreed with the Pharisees about almost every doctrine. They did not believe in the oral tradition. And you'll see them always dealt with separately by Messiah Yeshua. Whenever there's a dispute, it's not the Pharisees and the Sadducees. Very, very rarely is that the case. It's always either the Pharisees and the scribes, because the scribes were those people who were like lawyers. You might call them lawyers now, who were, halakhic experts who disputed with Yeshua about, various halakhic issues, which are what most of the disputes are about, okay? On the other hand, you hear the Sadducees named separately because they have a different set of beliefs. Like, for instance, we talked about, we're going to look at the question of resurrection. You remember this one in Matthew chapter 22, in which, they come up with this ridiculous thing about, the Black Widow. She marries 7 men, 7 brothers. Each one of them dies in turn. Mm-hmm. In the resurrection, whose husband will she be? Mm-hmm. And Yeshua says, clearly you don't understand anything about the resurrection. You're stupid. And it's a stupid question, and he knows it's a loaded question anyway, because they don't believe in the resurrection. See, this is the whole point. Yeshua could have ended the argument by saying, guys, you don't believe in the resurrection anyway. Why are you asking me this stupid question?
Tony, I guess it's really important. They not only don't believe in Yeshua resurrection, they don't believe in life after death. For anybody, when it goes into Paul's arguments later, it's really important for later on to understand even how he slipped out of that group by getting them fighting against each other.
Right.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So,
if they didn't believe in life after death, why then were they so strict to the law? What was their benefit? What did it give them?
It gave them power.
Authority.
They believed in the Torah, literally. And they were trying to follow the rules that the Torah gave them as literally as possible. There's a group today, what are they? How are the right pronunciation? Karaites. Who are supposedly descendants of Sadducees, or at least they're the intellectual descendants of the Sadducees. And these people believe the Karaite movement still to this day, and you can look them up on the internet, you can find them. I think there are about 10,000 who live in the land of Israel. And they are people who subscribe to the Torah literally. The problem with that, of course, is that some of the laws taken literally are really quite difficult to achieve. I mean, if for instance, you think, let's say, you shall not kindle a fire on Shabbat, means you have to sit in the cold and the dark for the entire weekend. I mean, that's pretty rough. And yet that's their thinking. So, Halakha says you can kindle a fire and keep that fire going all during the Sabbath. As long as you kindled it prior to the start of the Sabbath, you can keep it going by feeding the fire. Okay, that kind of stuff. That's why certain, Orthodox Jews leave the lights on, in their homes. just leave the lights on, and we won't have to worry about it. And we'll have the light. We'll just leave the lights on, like that. And it's not like you got to sit in the dark. And that was not God's intention by telling you couldn't kindle a fire on the Sabbath. Okay. So this is an idea about these Sadducees. Okay, let's move on and talk about the Zealots. Okay, so the Zealots were this party founded by this man Yehuda of Galilean. Or at least that's what a lot of people think. Josephus. And it was an organized band of robbers, or brigands. If you read N.T. Wright's books, he calls them brigands. Basically, to me, what the Zealots were a party of resistance, of violent resistance to the Roman occupation. More or less, their thinking was. Oh, by the way, I should mention one thing about the Pharisees, and now I can mention about the Zealots too. Both these groups were apocalyptic. In other words, that they believed that God was going to deliver Israel through some kind of messianic deliverance. Now, the Pharisees believed that, okay? But they believed that God would do it, that in God's timing, God would raise up the right people, and it would occur. The Zealots, who were Pharisaical in part, at least, they would probably listen to the Pharisees in terms of halakhic decision making. However, they believed that only through armed conflict could they achieve the messianic deliverance. And they were the militants of their day. Terrorists of their day, if you will. Okay? Equivalent today might be Hamas as opposed to the Palestinian Authority. In our own terms. Hamas says, listen, the only way we're going to settle this with the Israelis is by, blowing them up and terrorizing them, and then eventually they're going to run away. Or we'll get rid, or they'll think it's just too much trouble and leave, something to that effect. Well, that was exactly what these Zealots were trying to do. They were trying to make it so miserable for the Romans to be there that they would finally just say, "Yeah, I'm not going to come up with this." Of course, we know what happened. That eventually, Rome got fed up, and they took care of that business. Which they could do very well. The Zealots had a leading role in the Jewish revolt of '66. And their role was terrible. By the way, they had a group within them called the Sicarii. And the Sicarii was named after a kind of knife that they would use, in which they would, they would target, mostly they would target Jewish people who they thought were collaborators. They didn't kill Romans all that much. They killed Jews who they thought were collaborating with the Romans. And they would go, 3 or 4 of them would surround the guy, slit his throat with these knives, or stab him with the, and walk away, leave his dead body on the ground.
So assassins, basically.
Okay, yeah, they were like assassins. The Zealot party was the party that got the Jews in trouble in '66. They finally got enough backing that they started the revolt. And when they all holed up in Jerusalem and they were Titus sieged Jerusalem, it was the Zealots that would not allow moderate Jews to leave. Mm-hmm. They would have made a deal with the Romans, many of them, but the Zealots refused to allow that. That's why Judah what was his name? I'm sorry.
No.
What was
Judas the Galilean?
No. There was I'm sorry. I'm drawing a blank.
You're talking about the prophet that told them not to resist or to resist?
No, there was a guy, a Jew, a Pharisee, who. No, I'm sorry, folks. I'm sorry, my brain is blanking out. I didn't put his name down.
Okay.
What did he do?
what he did was
Josephus says who wrote
he
about
was the guy who escaped from Jerusalem by pretending he was dead, and his disciples put him in a like a casket filled with not Barcode. No. And they filled his. It'll come to me. They filled his.
I blinked too. I was remember this guy.
They filled his casket with garbage and rotting stuff, so it smelled like he was dying. And he was able to be smuggled out of the city. He went to Titus and he said to Titus, "Please allow me to take the Jewish scholars out of here, and we will be peaceful." And they agreed to a peaceable existence, and they were allowed to go into the gate. They went to Yavne. What's his name? Yochanan ben Zakkai. Thank you. Yochanan ben Zakkai. So Yochanan was able to get out of the city, but he had to sneak out because if the zealots had found him, they would have killed him for sure. Okay? So, and then we know what happened with the zealots that wound up at Masada. They're such fanatics, they wound up killing themselves rather than be captured by the Romans, which was probably a better idea for them anyway by that point because they would all been crucified. So anyway, so the zealots are this party that wants to do violence in order to break from the Roman yoke. Now I want you to think about that when we get to points where Yeshua is dealing. He actually brings on board among his disciples a man who is a zealot, right? Yeah, Simon the Zealot.
That's right.
And why does he do that? And what does that mean for how his disciples felt about the mission of Messiah Yeshua? Okay? So all of these are very interesting things that we have to kind of understand. One other group that we'll talk about, even though the Essenes are not mentioned by name in the gospel. So these they're Jews, and they seem to have an affection. Let me tell you about my thing about the Essenes. The Essenes were ascetics. They had a community in Qumran, which is in the Judean desert.
Mm-hmm.
They believed that the temple was the seat of Satan.
Mm-hmm.
That the temple was an impure place run by sinners and impure people, and they did not frequent the temple. They did not use the temple. They had their own rituals, which they performed out in the desert, and there's a whole body of literature that's come out of the Dead Sea Scrolls regarding all of their stuff. They saw themselves as the sons of light, and that all these other Jews were sons of darkness, and that God would purify in the end time, whenever that was coming, that God would purify the Jewish people. So remember when Yeshua talks about sons of light and sons of, he does talk a little bit about this. I think he's directing some of his commentary at these guys who got it wrong too. All right? Mm-hmm. Okay.
In Jerusalem, the wall around, is there a gate of the Essenes? I'm thinking Linda Leandri, when she was over there, she said there was some gate of the Essenes.
No, they would not have gotten involved with the temple. Let me see if I have some.
I don't think there's one named the gate of the Essenes.
Pardon?
I don't think there's one named the gate, like there's all the names of all the gates.
Yeah.
Never heard of that.
Okay. So from Josephus' writings, we have this description of the Essenes. These last are Jews by birth, seem to have a greater affection for one another than the other sex had. The Essenes reject pleasures as an evil, but esteem continence, and the conquest over our passions to be a virtue. They neglect wedlock, but choose out of other persons' children. In other words, the Essene community were a bunch of ascetics, and you were selected from other people to join the group. They did not. They weren't men and women who then married and raised their families in this. It was like monastic.
Yeah.
It was a monastic tradition, which is very rare in Judaism. You don't see many, there aren't Jewish monasteries. Mm-hmm. But these guys were of a monastic bent, right? They absolutely deny the fitness of marriage, and the succession of mankind thereby continued. but they guard against the lascivious behavior of women and are persuaded that none of them preserve their fidelity to one man. I mean, I guess they had a very low view of women, you know. Okay.
There's some kind of like agnosticism.
Well, I don't think they were Gnostic. I think they were apocalyptic of a really bizarre kind,
Okay.
in which they anticipated the end of the world very soon, and that they were out there in the desert preparing themselves for that end. And they didn't have anything. They had nothing to do with the temple, and really, Yeshua doesn't have a whole lot to do with them, other than his own sense of being the light of the world, as opposed to them being the sons of light, who anticipate themselves to be. What?
Didn't the Essenes keep the pot of red oil of frankincense, like the last jar of red oil of frankincense that there was in the world? It's still somebody somewhere knows where it is in case they ever go to a night.
I'm unaware of that. Yeah, anything's possible. I mean, I don't know what they found in those caves. You know. So it may be true. Okay. So just a little picture of these people, all right? Now, I don't know why this wasn't included in your package. But do you need to talk to somebody or you just... Okay. How are we doing with that? Okay, I guess. Okay, I'm going to project something up on the board here. So give me a second, and I want to go over it with you all. I need a moment to get the. Let me just share it with cool. Okay, folks, I'm going to just share this. I'm going to share my screen so that you can see this. All right. So, okay. So here's a picture. This is a diagram. I hope we can make this out. It's a diagram I put together. And like all diagrams, it's limited in its ability to tell the truth. Okay. But it is an effort on my part to try to illustrate the multi-dimensional nature of the Judaisms of Yeshua's day. Judaism was not a monolithic faith. It was a multifaceted faith. Mm-hmm. There were certain things that all Jews had in common. Can anybody think of a couple of things that all Jews would have had?
Monotheism.
Say?
Monotheism.
Well, monotheism.
Torah.
Yeah. Let's limit it off to Torah, because Torah is how you define it. Remember, the Pharisees like Torah, but they had a view.
We're about the Shema.
All right. So circumcision is one. There are basically three things. Shabbat is the second. One more.
Shema?
Nope. It has nothing to do with ritual stuff.
Okay.
We want kosher. So these are the three things that all Jews held in common. Mm-hmm. Shabbat observance, circumcision of their sons, and the kosher laws, that they would only eat kosher food. That's the only three things they had in common. Everything else was up for grabs. Okay? Now that's a whole body of stuff. That's a whole lot of stuff that's up for grabs. Yeah. Okay? Mm-hmm. So again, we went through the Pharisees, right? We talked about them. We went through the Sadducees. We went through the Zealots. We went through the Essenes. So now there's one group that's still left. That's the one in the middle, the red group, the Nazarenes. Okay? So where do we think that the Nazarenes might have fit in on this scale running from the Pharisees to the Essenes? I stuck them in the middle. I'm not sure that's quite right. No, there's no bottom or top here.
Closer to the Pharisees and the Sadducees, further from the Essenes than the Zealots.
Right. I actually,
well,
let me just say this. I did not put them in this order because I thought there was some relationship. Because if that were true, I would probably have stacked them this way. I would have probably said Pharisees. And maybe I would have put the Pharisees all the way on the right, considering our politics, kind of thing. But Pharisees, then I would have probably put Nazarenes.
Yeah.
And then I would have put the Zealots. And then the Sadducees and the Essenes, in that order. Because the belief systems of the Nazarenes very much corresponded to the belief systems of the Pharisees. Okay? Yeshua is not far from being a Pharisee, although he would never label himself, nor do I think we can hit him with a label of any one of these things, other than, the Nazarene. Okay?
Yeah, Nazarene.
But when we get into the discussions that Yeshua does have with the Pharisees, I think we'll discover that Yeshua was not far from them. Remember, we read a portion today where they were talking about which is the greatest commandment, and Yeshua says, love God with all your heart, soul, and mind, and then love your neighbor as yourself. And the other guy repeats it, the Pharisee repeats it, and Yeshua says to him, brother, you're not far from the kingdom. All right? So clearly he felt some sense of relationship with them. And that's the reason why most of the arguments are with the Pharisees, folks. You don't argue with people who don't agree with you at all. Nobody cares. They're not even going to talk to you. But when they think that you're a part of them and you're in some ways deviating a little bit, then they want to try and make a corrective. That's what they're trying to do. That's what the scribes and Pharisees are doing. They see in Messiah Yeshua something great, but they feel that he's, there are certain things he's doing and saying that are not right. And they want to bring him around to a corrective state. They want to correct his thinking of him.
Yes. Most of what he wasn't doing right have to do with observing the tradition, which he's calling them on.
Right. So they're halakhic disputes.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And so what's happened as a result of this, ladies and gentlemen, is that when people read the gospel, when traditional Christianity has read the gospel, they have read the Pharisees, and by virtue of the Pharisees, the Jewish people, as the enemy of the truth, as the enemy of the gospel. And Judaism then is the enemy of the Christianity truth, and the enemy of the gospel.
Of the religions.
You see, and that's not what's going on in the gospel. Now, when we get to the letters of Paul, we'll make another argument. We'll make a different argument. But we're trying to learn about what Messiah Yeshua had to say and how he dealt with his own people. Okay? So these disputes that we see in the Gospels are not as serious, frankly, in my opinion, as people have made them out to be over time. That very often it's a matter of whose rabbi are you listening to?
Yeah.
Messiah Yeshua has an opinion about. Look, let me give you one. And we're going to probably go over this in some detail later on when we get into the Sermon on the Mount, the teachings of Messiah Yeshua. His teaching on marriage. So he says. So people are. He's saying he makes the argument. Let me summarize. He makes the argument that marriage is something that should happen between one man and one woman for life. That's Messiah Yeshua's, that's his rule. That's the rule. Okay, that's the ruling he wants to give. All right? Now, so somebody says, but wait a minute, it's in the law of Moses that you can divorce. If we have to follow your rule, who would ever get married? Because you would feel locked into this situation and with no way out. So Messiah Yeshua says, listen, Moses did allow it. Because of the hardness of your heart, knowing how you are, and knowing that you would do it anyway. There's the only thing I could think of, knowing that you're going to do it anyway. He wanted to domesticate it. Because really what happened in the law was that a woman who was divorced from her husband had rights. She wasn't going to simply be abandoned.
Right.
If he wanted to divorce her, well, you're going to pay, bro. You're not going to leave her hanging.
That tradition carries on.
Okay, well,
married.
Right, but it's right. It's a right tradition. Okay,
It's protect the rights of the woman.
It's to protect the rights of the woman, because men would have done it anyway. They would have simply broken the law. So God says, okay, but you have to give her a get, and when you give her that get, there's a whole bunch of conditions involved in that. See, so but Messiah Yeshua is saying to us in his teaching, that's not the way God intends for it to be. The way God intends for it to be is you get married to one person and you stay married to that person as long as you're both alive. And that's it. So, we have to understand that he's not saying that, Jews allow divorce, therefore they're evil. No, there was a reason why God allowed divorce. He's just saying, you should be doing everything in your power to avoid it if you possibly can.
Question. Do you suppose there are some other of Moses' rulings which are in that same category?
I think if we go through the teachings of Messiah Yeshua, particularly in the Sermon on the Mount, you will discover that there are other things which were interpreted by various authorities over the years from Moses' law, which Yeshua then gives us a different picture of. If you have your syllabus that I gave you on the first week, you'll see that there are 3 classes in which it says, "And I say to you."
Uh-huh.
So there, it's about what Yeshua said. You have heard it said, and I say to you.
Uh-huh.
Now,
So
I say, and I say it to you. I say to you, rather than, but I say to you. Because the word kai there can be translated either and or but. And the idea there is that people think that Yeshua is contradicting the law as opposed to appending the law or giving further explanation of it. But you see, there are 3 classes in which we're going to go over details of Yeshua's teachings regarding Torah. And there you will see other examples of what you're talking about.
Great.
Okay?
Thank you.
All right? Last thing, as far as this diagram is concerned in our class, we're going to end our class today, is this diagram shows, if you can see, I don't have a pointer here, but yeah, do you have a pointer thing here?
You can use a cursor.
There's a cursor.
Yeah, you
You
can.
just use that.
Yeah, forget it. You're making me learn something I can't. So over here, there are a couple of charts. So over here, you see it says more honor. And this is helpful in understanding the Judaism of that day. So it starts at the very top, priests and Levites. They're at the top of the social scale, if you will. And you'll notice that the really important people in the gospel stories are the high priests, right? Caiaphas and Annas, the high priests, those guys, So priests, then Levites, then Israelites, full Israelites, meaning you were born an Israelite. Then you see proselytes, in other words, converts from the nations to Judaism, full proselytes, meaning they were circumcised that they were male. And then you have freedmen. So this is a classification of people who had been Jewish slaves who are now free. And then you see here illegitimate children of priests. This chart, by the way, was from Talmud. Talmudic, okay?
Mm-hmm.
So illegitimate children of priests. Then they have another classification of temple slaves who also would have been Jewish. And then mamzers, bastards, we call bastards, mamzers, people who were born illegitimately, but not of priests, but of common Israelites.
Otherwise, is it definitely 2 separate categories? I mean, definitely one category, because reading it vertically as a list, it looks like illegitimate is one category and children of priests.
No.
I couldn't fit it on one line. That's why it wound up on 2 lines. It's illegitimate children of priests.
It's funny that Yeshua was considered a mamzer.
He was considered a mamzer.
Yeah.
Right. So he would have been sort of down here in the bottom. However, so by the way, in Jewish thinking, remember we were talking about the Pharisees and their issues of purity? So priests could be defiled by Levites because Levites are of a lower purity, and so on, all the way down the line. So you avoided people like that, particularly when you were going to do something as far as the temple was concerned. Remember that example I gave you in Mark, where Yeshua is hanging around with like sinners and prostitutes and stuff like that, and the guy comes and starts complaining to him, saying, "Don't you know who you're hanging around with? These people are defiling you." It's because he sees life like that. You see, he sees life like this chart. Now, I want you to take a note of what's not on the list. What's not on this list? What category?
Women, for instance?
No.
Gentiles.
Gentiles.
Gentiles, yeah.
No Gentiles. They don't even make the list.
They're not even on the list.
Not even on the list. Because they'll count. Now, this is important.
We are saying the same words.
This is very important when we come to the place where Yeshua goes and talks to the Samaritan woman.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Somebody's got his.
And his disciples come back and they're freaking
Somebody's
out.
got the mic on.
Even she was freaking out. You talk to
Yeah,
me.
right. She's freaking out. and when his disciples come here, they're freaking out, not because he's talking to a woman, but because he's talking to what they would consider a Gentile. That's what the problem is. And then there's this other point where the woman, a Gentile woman, comes to Messiah Yeshua and he says and asks for healing or something, and Yeshua says, "Listen, I can't feed to the dogs what belongs to God's the children." And she makes this wonderful statement of, "But I would take the crumbs." And Messiah Yeshua says, "Listen, I've not seen this faith in Israel. I mean, heals her right on the spot." It helps us to understand how big a deal this is in the society and what
we read that this morning.
It would have been for those who were watching. You understand? So you have to understand the social structure in order to understand some of the impact of some of the things that Yeshua did. He blew everybody's mind because he would not conform to social norms.
Yep.
Think about that. A person comes into our world, the modern American world, and starts doing all these weird and strange things that seem to, in one way or another, violate our sensibilities. How would we react? What would we think of him or her? And we might have a similar reaction.
I think
you see something.
put on
The Samaritan woman, didn't she?
mental
refer
institution,
to
I think.
her ancestor Joseph and his well.
Yeah, but you got to understand.
Jacob.
We have to understand the relationship between
The Samaritan woman
Judeans and
referred to
people in
Jacob.
Judea proper and Samaria. Samaritans were considered like,
They were
they were half-breeds.
Yeah.
But lower in
You know,
Okay, so they weren't.
they weren't full Israelites because, this all goes back to who occupied the land when the Jews were sent off into Babylon. I mean, you got to read through those texts in the Bible and you see how, you remember when Nehemiah comes back, he says, all you guys who've married women who are not born Jews, you got to divorce them now. And you have to send them away and their children. And that's pretty brutal. Okay, but there was an attitude that it formulated, and it carried on into Yeshua's day. Even to this day, there are a few Samaritans. There's Samaritans still in there. They're still not considered full Jews.
No.
Question is, what happened with those released women and children? Where did they go?
For another day, another study.
Okay.
Free from human honor and from the sort of reproach that people can put on him for being blind to the humanly constructed social categories to see people as God saw them, which it's a given person on a given day, not how they were born or something, is their personal nearness to God and their personal walk with God their attainment in the spiritual realm is much more significant than who they were born to, or if they were a mamzer, and he was so used to probably having to deal with people's assumption if they knew you had known his mother from her youth, you know.
Yeah, a lot of that is true, but here's the thing. I'll leave you with this thought. Ancient people, particularly these Mediterraneans, there's a wonderful book called The New Testament World. It's a study in social anthropology of the New Testament world. And it talks about the mindset of these people. We don't have that mindset. We have a modern Western mindset, all of us. So some of these concepts seem so weird and foreign to me. Like, what are they fussing over? But it meant so much to them. You see what I said? The farther you go up on this chart, the more honor the person has. Honor and shame were the two most important categories for the people of that day. And your honor and shame were based on certain things. A lot had to do with who your relatives were. Today, honor is not the biggest thing in the world. Today, our greatest values are money and power, and followed by fame. Or maybe money, fame, and power. I mean, I would say, some combination thereof. Those are the three great values. And people don't care about their shame.
Yeah.
I won't go any further.
That's for sure.
People don't care about their shame. They care about their power, their money, influence, that kind of thing. But in this society, honor was everything. And where you stood on the hierarchy of honor is everything. This is why the guy, again, I'll go back to that, that Pharisee, Simon, I think his name was complaining to Yeshua about this woman, this common woman, a prostitute probably, who's, crying over him and, cleaning his feet with her hair and, because she's looking for forgiveness. And how he's utterly, he's blown, his mind is being blown. He can't stand it because this woman is violating every rule of honor that he understands. Now, some of it you can't blame on him. You understand? We can't simply blame these guys as bad guys because their culture was different than ours. See, we have this tendency to think, oh, he acted like that, he's just a bad guy. Not necessarily. That's why we have to crawl inside of their hearts and understand them. And remember something, Messiah Yeshua did not come to condemn his people. He came to help them. To help them to understand things from God's point of view. Just like he's trying to do for you and me. So if we can understand them better, maybe we can be a little bit more compassionate toward the people, the Pharisees and the other guys in the Bible. When we get to really bad guys, we will talk about the really bad guys. There are a few villains in the story. Not everyone who's named Pharisee is a villain.
Well, everybody gets a failing grade who fails to honor the Messiah, because it's the only piece of honor that matters is to honor God and the Messiah.
Well, again, let's have a little compassion on them and their understanding of who and what the Messiah was. Okay, and maybe we can see we'll see things that we didn't see. Okay, thank you, everyone. That's going to conclude our class for today. So let me unshare my. What did I do? Are you guys still there? Oh, back to the meeting. Here we go.
We're still here.
Stop sharing. Okay. All right, folks. So thank you for participating in the class today. We'll pick it up again next week with class number 3. I'll send you the notes early in the week. If I don't have if I don't have your email and you want me to send you the notes, please make sure I get it. And let's just end with a quick prayer as we end our class. So, Lord, thank you for our Messiah Yeshua. You brought him into a particular time and place. And it's really up to us to understand that time and place so that we can understand him and his interaction with his people during those days. And maybe then we'll understand precisely what he's trying to tell us in our day. So, Father, we bless you that we can do this, that we are free We pray for this land. We pray for its goodness, that you would show, that you would just protect us and keep us as a light in the world. And Father, I just want to pray a special blessing for Jared and for Ingrid as they wed tomorrow. May their lives be blessed. And as I said earlier, may you increase their territory. And give them every blessing from heaven, we pray. Thank you for all these things in Yeshua's holy name. Amen.
Amen.
Great. Shabbat Shalom, everyone.
Shabbat Shalom. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Rabbi.